All right, now on to the less wrong posts.
Yes, typicality and asymmetrical similarity. It starts out by saying birds fly. Well, except ostriches don't. Which is a more typical bird, a robin or an ostrich?
I liked this, and he did dive into exactly where my first thoughts were going, which is this depends where you grow up. Like,
oh, yeah.
I mean, not just where you grew up. Like, because if I had grown up just around penguins, and that was my primary bird, first of all, I would have had a great childhood. And second of all, the first time I saw a swallow, I'd be very confused. Not I don't know, it depends on how well I was educated. But to me, my central example would be, these fat things that swim and can't fly, right?
Right, yes.
I wouldn't think of whatever birds as birds.
But you wouldn't have a category for birds because if you grew up around penguins, you grew up in Antarctica, and there wouldn't be any birds, right? Or are there birds down there?
There's penguins.
Well, right, but you would just have penguins, and since there's no other birds to fall into a group with them, you wouldn't need a category of bird.
Maybe I grew up in a zoo with ostriches and penguins. But those animals are so different that they don't meaningfully belong next to each other in my brain, do they?
No.
But I guess, what he was drawing at was just you've got central examples of things. He talked about how, for example, if you ask subjects to press a button to indicate true or false in response to statements like a robin is a bird or a penguin is a bird, reaction times are faster for more central examples. And then parenthetically, I'm still unpacking my books, but I'm reasonably sure my source on this is Lakoff, 1986.
Yeah.
And I just had to mention, it seems like he's never not packing or unpacking books.
Well, these posts were all written in a matter of days. The fact that it takes us 2 weeks to go through what he went through in 5 days makes a big difference here.
Totally. And I'm sure he has a lot of books.
Yes, that too. Ooh, I wonder how many books he does have.
I have moved between places and then never taken books out of boxes. And those are the ones I just give away. Yeah. It's like, all right, if I didn't need these for 3 years, I just don't need them, right?
Exactly, yeah. I've tossed out boxes basically unopened before just because after I've moved twice with the same box and not opening it, I'm like, I obviously don't need whatever's in here.
Man, if you'd opened it, it could have been the one thing you've been looking for,
I think I did peek in.
Good. That just seems prudent.
Yeah.
All right, which of these is a more natural statement, Inyash? 98 is approximately 100, or 100 is approximately 98?
Definitely the first one.
I feel that way too. I think I can explain why I feel that way.
Okay, why?
If you'd asked me which is closer, 68 or 70, or 70 or 68, I'd say the same, right? Mm-hmm. But 100 is like a certainty. I think of it in terms of percentages.
Oh, okay. See, I think of it in terms of I'm constantly, when I'm doing math in my head, doing quick shortcuts like making something 100 and then doing the math to it when the numbers are easier and then subtracting 2 to my answer from my answer at the very end.
Oh, yeah, that would work too.
Yeah, so based on how many times I've said, okay, this number is basically this number, and I'll remember to subtract the difference at the end, it falls into that same pattern, where I would never, ever make it harder to do the math by thinking, oh yeah, 100 is basically 98, so I'm going to do the math to 98 instead.
Right, let's do 98 plus 47 instead of 100 plus 47.
Or 100 plus 45.
Right. To me, 98 and 100 are different kinds of categories, but that's that specific example. With the robin and, penguin thing, that still flies.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I did there?
Oh
no.
Why? Now the tomatoes are going to fly directly at your head.
Try and find me.
I know where you live.
Shoot. All right. Let's keep trucking.
So people were more likely to expect a disease would spread from robins to ducks on an island than from ducks to robins.
This is where this is actually a problem.
Yeah.
It's all fine and dandy if people are, Oh, and there's other funny case of people thinking that Mexico is more like the United States than the United States is like Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And, I could also see that being the case, in a way that isn't just rationalization, where it's
because, if America has the Western culture that is permeating everything.
Well, I'll take your answer. It's better.
Okay.
Yeah. The world copies us.
Yes.
We set trends. We make up memes and movies.
We are the cool kids.
Half the time. It works every time.
Did Mexico make a movie with that line? No, they did not.
Maybe they have sense.
See, then they're copying us again.
Great example was they did not just a cheap ripoff, but they did a full series of Breaking Bad.
Oh, neat.
With, and it wasn't dubbed. It was all new actors, but it was the exact same show, same everything. And, that's just because it was good enough that they're like, we want one of these too.
Yeah.
The US does this a lot with Japanese movies and shows.
And they do it with some British stuff too. Like The Office was originally a show in England.
Right, yeah. And apparently we're making some Squid Games movie or show.
Which sounds like a dumb idea.
I think so too. The show was, I think This is my hot take for this. I think that show was overhyped. It was fine.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even the best game that kills you show that came out of that part of the world that year.
Right.
So I'm not looking forward to season 2, but we'll see how it does.
But this thing where people expect for the disease to travel from the central example to outlier examples more readily than the reverse, interesting thing. I can see how that could fuck things up in your world model.
Yeah.
He basically ends this by saying, look, this is another reason not to pretend that you or anyone else is really going to treat words as Aristotelian logical classes. Nobody is going to say when you present them with the plucked chicken, yeah, that's a human. This is the same kind of thing. People don't use words that way, and it's really stupid to pretend that they do. Kind of a manipulative dark arts sort of thing if you try it.
I think people sometimes do try it, even today, which is interesting.
Oh, are you kidding me? This is one of the main things that happens nowadays during the culture wars.
Yeah, underneath my blissful rock, I can only hear echoes of the culture wars. So
Thank God.
But I do know exactly. I think I know the kinds of things you're talking about, and yeah, it's true. But I also love how just in these, he can't finish one of these posts in the sequence without just throwing a tomato at Aristotle.
I mean, they were working with nothing. They had to invent it from the ground up. They did pretty good considering, as you brought up last time, that, everything hurts all the time and nobody knows why lightning.
Yeah, I mean, they're starting from scratch. They did pretty good.
Yeah.
But just to pretend like we haven't made progress in the last two and a half millennia is an insult to progress. And us.
Exactly. Yes. We're better than that.
All right, well, we've got the next post coming up is the cluster structure of Thingspace.
Starts out with saying, it may seem like blue is closer to blue-green than to red, but how much closer?
Yeah, in the same way that you can see a robin as a robin, brown tail, red breast, standard robin shape, maximum flying speed when unladen, its species-typical DNA and individual alleles, and obligatory African or European, I was going to say swallow, but robin in this case.
He makes this point to go on to say that you could see a robin as a single point in configuration space whose dimensions describe everything we knew or could know about the robin. Volume and mass, the shape of the robin, its color, you can likewise think of as part of the robin's position in Thingspace, even though they aren't single dimensions. Like a graph, an XY graph can tell you where an object is located. This is the same kind of thing, like on a graph of colors, the point will tell you where the color is. And you can do that for basically everything about the physical characteristics of a robin.
And the color is a good example too, because even on like just basic color selectors, you've got the circle that encompasses the colors, right? And they all blend and they all meet in the middle at black. But then there's this kind of third dimension of transparency with like this slider, right?
Yeah.
And they just put the slider going left and right at the bottom instead of like having you move forward and backwards on the color, because it's way easier on a screen to do it that way, right?
Yes.
I think this post is brilliant.
Yeah.
It sets it up with like a simple example and then adds in like the extra steps that you need to kind of just get this almost literally galaxy-brained model of how to think about things relating to each other.
Yeah. You can think of them all as just a configuration space with many dimensions for every distinct characteristic of an object, so that a position of an object's point in this space corresponds to all the information about that object.
Yeah.
And, importantly, if we're not sure of a robin's exact mass and volume, we can think of it as a little cloud in Thingspace, a volume of uncertainty within which the robin might be.
Right, somewhere between virus and aircraft carrier.
Yes. And honestly, probably much more constricted than that.
Maybe golf ball and bowling ball, and put robin somewhere in the middle of those, right?
Sounds very reasonable. He goes on to expand this idea into less concrete objects and more concepts. He says, think of mother. The central mother conceives her child, gives birth to it, and supports it. Is an egg donor who never sees her child a mother? She is the genetic mother. What about a woman who is implanted with a foreign embryo and bears it to term? She is a surrogate mother. And the woman who raises a child that isn't hers genetically? Why, she's an adoptive mother.
Yondu put it succinctly in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 when he said, he may be your father, boy, but he ain't your daddy.
I don't think that would make sense if you haven't actually seen the movie.
No, but everyone who's listening to this is cool and has, so.
Good point. We don't allow lame people to listen to our podcast. If you're lame, you got to turn this off right now.
Not try to push us into culture war stuff, but like, isn't every confusing thing that people argue about with terms just like, couldn't that one bullet point about the central mother example, like, solve all of these complications if people were just willing to put their pitchforks down?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Just checking. I thought so too.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, he's pointing out that, some things can have certain characteristics but not be a central example, and we generally have different terms for those things
Right.
to help differentiate them.
As we all know, humans have 10 fingers, except for Fred, who has 9, so he's not a human.
Yes. But he says the way we actually think about it is humans have 10 fingers, Fred is a human, therefore Fred is a 9-fingered human.
Oh god, my Aristotelian syllogism. What do I do?
No! You must abandon all logic now and become a woo practitioner.
Shoot.
Fred proved you wrong. There is no such thing as certainty in the world.
There's no such thing as a perfect definition. Maybe I can live with that.
Definitions are supposed to point at clusters in Thingspace as opposed to perfectly outline something in all its details.
Exactly. Penguins are kind of birds.
Right. He says, if we thought about the intention of the word mother, it might be like a distributed glow in Thingspace. A glow whose intensity matches the degree to which that volume of Thingspace matches the category mother. Then suppose we mapped all the birds in the world into Thingspace. A robin is more similar to another robin than either is similar to a pigeon, but robins and pigeons are more similar to each other than either is to a penguin. Then the center of all birdness would be densely populated by many neighboring tight clusters, robins and sparrows and canaries and pigeons and many other species. Eagles and falcons and other large predatory birds would occupy a nearby cluster, penguins would be in a more distant cluster, and likewise chickens and ostriches. The result might look indeed something like an astronomical cluster, many galaxies orbiting the center and a few outliers.
I like that. And he says, I prefer that last visualization, the glowing points, because as I see it, the structure of cognitive intention follows from the extensional cluster structure. First came the structure in the world, the empirical distribution of birds over Thingspace. Then, by observing it, we formed a category whose intentional glow roughly overlays this structure.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And then I can kind of picture things, like chairs and tables and desks and whatever. And like, is a beanbag a chair? Well, you sit in it. That's about all they have in common,
Yeah.
I could picture them as closer to each other in Thingspace rather than like a hammer and a desk chair.
Absolutely. I also love this way of looking at it because it points out that there is a structure to the world. Our minds are trying to map it. The closer we can cluster things in our mind to how they are kind of clustered in the world, the more useful our map will be. This is not like random arbitrary, we have decided to define a human as such, and therefore that is what a human is. It is more like we have seen a whole bunch of these things in the real world, and they seem very similar on these dimensions we care about. So we identify that cluster of similarity in the real world by using the same word for it in our minds.
Yeah, because it works enough of the time to be valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if person is, I want to say is an unnatural category as opposed to natural, but I don't actually know if that makes any difference or actually is a real thing.
I mean, there's a lot of controversy as to whether fetuses are persons, whether animals are persons, whether an AI in the near future will be a person.
Yeah, because that's a concept that we made up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like humans are things that you can point at.
I think you can identify things that have agency in the world.
Oh, so it depends on how you define person. No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so, I mean, agency, I don't know. Yeah, let's look at us into too far afield, but I don't know if that's required. When I think person, I think include this in my sphere of moral consideration.
Okay, I see, yeah.
Or at least near the top of or near the center of my sphere of moral consideration. I do think we have something we probably owe to like the dumbest animals who aren't anywhere near the middle, and probably more than zero things that we owe to things like a piece of art or something, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So but again, so person's a very squishy, very, this is where like philosophers, they need to do that thing where it's like, all right, let me define my terms very, very carefully. Because otherwise we're going to just talk right past each other because, I'm thinking person as far as like moral consideration weight, and you're thinking of it in terms of like makes decisions that it wants to do.
Yeah, I would not necessarily tie persons to moral consideration.
See, I think it's because this is the typicality thing, right? I think I first came across it reading Peter Singer. If you came across it thinking, reading AI literature, then it's like we're coming at it from different angles, right?
I'm pretty sure both of us knew the word person and roughly what it meant to us long before we came across those sorts of literatures.
Shoot, that's a good point. I think when I was younger, I probably just equated it with human being.
Yeah, I think that is why people try to hijack the word person, because they know that people equate it with human beings, and people have a lot of ideas about how you can treat human beings. and how you should treat human beings.
That's why I always thought it was funny you mentioned like fetuses being people. This was always a dumb move. I remember in the pro-choice side of the debate was like, oh, they're not human. It's like, of course they are.
Yeah,
they have
absolutely.
2 human parents. Like, what else would they be?
Yeah.
The question isn't whether or not they're human. The question is whether or not like does it have moral weight?
For me, the question would be: is it a person?
Interesting. Do persons have moral weight?
If it's not a person, it has almost no moral weight generally. It can have some.
Yeah, okay, but so I think we're kind of talking about the same thing there then.
Moral weight is a tricky thing for me because we can talk about morality for hours and we should not, because otherwise we'll get distracted.
Good point. In that case, a natural cluster, a group of things highly similar to each other, may have no set of necessary sufficient properties, no set of characteristics that all group members have and no non-members have.
Yeah,
I can't think of anything that I could define that says everything in this group has all these characteristics and no non-members have any of these characteristics. Like,
there's definitely some things you could, like matter.
I suppose. Well, you get enough energy together, you can bend space-time like matter.
The way I think of matter is it is something with mass.
Well, if you think of mass as, the thing in which the universe contorts itself around.
All right, fine. Have it your way then.
I'm really just trying to make it my way, but I'm just like, so you're right. Maybe for giant, like very zoomed out categories that have very few properties, like matter is like stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Stuff you can poke. If I can't poke it, then it doesn't count, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it could work for very simple things like that. But I was looking around my room here, and there's everything in here shares some properties. I guess not least of which it's all made of matter. So,
right. Is the idea of love made out of matter, though? But on the other hand, there isn't love floating around in your room.
That's a good point too. Well. This did get deeply philosophical. Is love real, man? Define real. He said in his best Morpheus impression.
If it is being simulated within the Matrix. So in that case, yes, love is real.
I think love was like an after that. Love wasn't being simulated. Love was real. The stuff was simulated.
By in the Matrix, I just meant literally the world we're living in right now. Kind of my running gag thing. We're all living in a simulation.
But I mean, if I'm like just to run with that, as long as we're off in left field here, in the movie The Matrix, food and cars and stuff were all simulated, but love and pain was all real.
What? Oh, right, because they appeared within the brains of people who were hooked into the Matrix.
Right.
Okay, see, I use the Matrix as shorthand for simulated reality so much that I actually forgot that there were real people hooked into a simulation.
Well, I mean, even if, I suppose if everything at bottom, if there was no top, right, then it would all be operating at the same level. But yeah, I guess what I was saying is like, there's actual people on the outside with their brains lighting up, right?
That's kind of crazy that the definition of Matrix has drifted for me enough that I forgot that in the movie there's actually human bodies in the real world that are hooked up to this thing.
I'm trying to decide if that actually makes a difference to the case I was making, but that is getting us too far afield. So we're past left field and we're out in the parking lot.
Okay.
Zooming back in. I would not object if someone said that birds are featherless or feathered flying things. But penguins don't fly. Well, fine. The usual rule has an exception. It's not the end of the world. The map is much smaller and less complicated than the territory. The point of the definition, feathered flying things, is to lead listener to the bird cluster.
Exactly.
Yeah. Seems straightforward.
It is a great definition of definitions. It points at something in the real world and how humans interact with it. So that is why this post has become so foundational.
Yeah. No, I love it. All right. Next ones we've got disguised queries and neural categories.